The wooden pestle moved in her hands with a rhythm that felt almost holy. Each grind against the mortar sang like a hymn, reducing sharp green glass into powder fine as flour. The first light of dawn crept through the cracks of the old plantation kitchen in Georgia, 1852, casting crooked shadows across wooden counters stained by decades of grease and smoke. For Eliza Carter, the woman at the center of this sweltering kitchen, today was not just another morning of labor. No, today was different. The glass she crushed wasn't ordinary waste. It had come from a broken wine bottle, shattered days ago during one of Master Charles Whitfield's violent outbursts. He had hurled it against the brick hearth in drunken rage, never caring who might be struck by its flying shards. Eliza had swept them carefully, her hands trembling but purposeful. She had kept each glittering fragment as if they were gems, because for her, they were. Each shard was a weapon, a promise, a prayer answered in silence. The southern heat pressed against the kitchen walls, even at this early hour. The air was thick, heavy, and suffocating. Outside, moss-draped oaks swayed lazily, their branches whispering secrets of sorrow and buried screams. Inside, Eliza's hands moved with the calm precision of someone who had made up her mind. Grind, turn, grind. She worked with patience born not of love, but of rage carried deep in her chest. For 20 years her dark skin glistened with sweat. Her arms bore scars from countless burns inflicted by iron stoves. Her back bent from years of scrubbing floors, lifting pots, and bowing to a master who saw her humanity as nothing more than property. Eliza had endured more than 2 decades of yes, Master Whitfield, and no, Master Whitfield, each word another nail in the coffin of her spirit. But this morning, her silence sang a different song. This time, the glass would speak for her. The kitchen door groaned, interrupting her thoughts. The faint shuffle of bare feet followed light, hesitant steps. A young girl entered, no more than 14. Her name was Ruth, a new servant, still clumsy with the harsh rhythms of plantation life. She rubbed her sleepy eyes and whispered, "Mornin', Miss Eliza." Eliza didn't pause in her grinding. Her eyes, however, flickered with something wild, something heavy that Ruth couldn't understand. "The master's wedding cake," Ruth said softly, her voice careful not to carry upstairs where the overseers slept. "It's going to be the finest thing this place ever seen." Eliza's lips curved into a shape that might have been mistaken for a smile. But it wasn't joy. It was the weight of 1,000 unspoken pains, 1,000 lashes, humiliations, and silent nights praying for justice. "Yes, child," Eliza replied steadily. "It surely will be." The powder in her bowl sparkled like sugar crystals in the slant of golden dawn. But it was no sweetness. It was her answer to decades of torment. A message hidden inside something the master loved most, food. Within the hour, the house would erupt with wedding preparations. Guests would arrive in shiny carriages. The halls would echo with music, silk dresses swishing across polished floors, and laughter rising like champagne bubbles. But here, in the suffocating heat of the kitchen, Eliza labored alone on a sacred mission. She carried, in her apron pocket, a small cloth pouch filled with powdered glass. To her, it wasn't just a pouch. It was a heartbeat, pulsing with the weight of everything she had lost. The chaos of mourning began to stir around her. Servants scurried through the corridors, carrying linens, arranging crystal, and whispering hurried instructions. Pots clanged. Smoke drifted. The sweet perfume of jasmine sneaked through the windows, mocking the bitterness of sweat and ashdot. Into this whirlwind burst Henry, the headhouse servant. His usually calm face was flushed, his voice tight with urgency. "Eliza, the cake must be ready by 4 o'clock sharp. Master says it should be tall as the church steeple and white as his bride's dress." Eliza's heart didn't stir. She only pressed her palm against the hidden pouch in her apron. Tall as a steeple, white as his bride's virtue. The irony almost made her laugh, if laughter hadn't died in her long ago. She had seen Master Whitfield's so-called virtue in the shadows of the slave quarters, in the bruises left on young girls' bodies, in the screams swallowed by the trees at night. "Don't you worry," she answered with a calmness that concealed her storm. "It will be perfect." Ruth hurried past with a tray of silver platters, her eyes wide with childish excitement. "Miss Clara's dress came all the way from London," she whispered, "with pearls sewn right in. Hundreds of M." Eliza nodded absently, though her mind had slipped elsewhere to another dress, one she could never forget. A simple shift, torn and bloodied. Her daughter's dress, her sweet Anna, only 16, taken by Master Whitfield's cruelty, and then sold away before Eliza could even hold her close, one last time. That wound still bled inside her. The air around her carried the sense of roasting pork and simmering greens, but Eliza tasted only bile. She saw Henry carefully arranging crystal glasses, each one worth more than she could ever dream to hold, and felt disgust twist inside her. Today's celebration, she knew, was nothing more than a grotesque parade. The rich would feast on delicacies created by hands that would never taste them, while the people who built their wealth remained invisible, broken, and voiceless. But this time, her hands would make something unforgettable. Eliza began gathering her ingredients: flour, butter, churned that very morning, eggs, sugar. To anyone else, it looked like the start of a simple cake, but to her, each ingredient carried meaning. Each was part of a recipe for justice. She cracked eggs against the rim of a ceramic bowl. Their golden yolks slipped into the mixture like drowned suns, and a shiver ran down her spine. For in their helpless descent, she remembered the whip, the leather slicing her back, the laughter of the man who wielded it, saying, "You'll learn your place, Eliza." Her fingers trembled as she scooped sugar, the white crystals cascading like snow. But her mind drifted to another white, the tears on her cheeks the day she was dragged from her mother's arms and sold at 14. Never to see her family again. Her hands worked with mechanical precision, folding butter into flour, mixing with a wooden spoon. But the motions stirred memories like ghosts, the rope burns from the whipping post, the laughter of men as she begged, the endless nights of praying for mercy that never came, and above it all, the memory of Anna, her daughter, her laughter silenced, her songs stolen, her body broken by the same man who would stand today in fine clothes, smiling as if blessed by heaven itself. Eliza blinked back the blur in her vision, focusing on the bowl before her. The batter turned smooth and golden, rich with sweetness, innocent to anyone who looked. But she knew better. Her hand brushed against the pouch again. The glass powder waited like a coiled snake, ready to strike. It was almost time. The kitchen roared with sounds of preparation, voices rising, footsteps rushing. But inside Eliza's heart, there was silence, a silence that carried power. She looked into the bowl of cake batter and whispered to herself, "When he tastes this, he'll taste everything he's ever done to me." And for the first time in decades, her hands stopped shaking. The plantation house of Whitfield Manor stirred awake as the sun climbed higher, its white columns and sprawling verandas glowing in the humid light of late morning. Servants hurried like ants across polished wooden floors, carrying linens, candles, and trays of silver. Laughter from upstairs floated down through the beams, where the master's wedding was about to become the grandest event of the county. In the kitchen, the air was thick, hot, and restless. The ovens roared like beasts, their bellies glowing red. Eliza Carter wiped her damp forehead with the back of her hand, her apron sticking to her skin. Inside its pocket lay the cloth pouch of ground glass, its weight pressing against her hip like a secret heartbeat. She knew it was waiting for the right moment. "Miss Eliza," Henry said, stepping back into the kitchen. His brow glistened, his voice clipped with stress. "Master wants the cake tall. 3 tiers at least. It must be ready before 4 o'clock. No mistakes today." Eliza met his eyes, her own gaze calm but unreadable. "It will be ready," she answered. Her voice carried a strange certainty that made Henry shift uncomfortably. He didn't question her further, only nodded and disappeared through the swinging door, barking new orders at a line of younger servants. Eliza turned back to her work. Around her, the kitchen clattered with chaos, knives chopping, water boiling, smoke curling in the rafters. But her mind moved elsewhere, into shadows of memory she couldn't silence. She cracked another egg, the yolk sliding into the bowl with a golden shimmer, and then it came, the memory she had tried to bury. Her back bent over a wooden post, the whip slicing into her skin, Master Charles's voice booming above her cries. "You'll learn your place, girl. Every lash will teach you." She stirred the sugar in, each white grain dissolving like snow in the summer heat. Yet she saw something else in its crystal stares, the countless tears shed in silence, tears she had swallowed when her cries changed. Nothing when mercy never came. Her fingers trembled as she reached for butter, soft and golden in her palm. But instead of sweetness, she felt again the rough rope that had burned her wrists when they tied her for punishment. She remembered counting lashes, whispering numbers through clenched teeth like a prayer not for mercy, but for the strength to survive. The memory of her daughter cut through sharper than any whip. Anna, sweet Anna, 16, with laughter like birdsong and hands quick enough to stitch or bake better than women twice her age. Eliza had begged, had dropped to her knees in this very kitchen, pleading with Master Charles not to take her child. "She's just a girl," she had whispered through tears. "Take me instead, please." But he had laughed, his cruelty colder than steel. "You belong to me, Eliza, and so does she. Don't ever forget that." The wooden spoon in Eliza's hand dug hard into the batter, her grip so tight her knuckles whitened. The golden mixture thickened, smooth and rich, but all she saw was Anna's torn dress, her broken spirit, the bruises shaped like fingerprints around her throat. 3 months later, Anna had bled to death on her pallet, her body unable to bear the burden forced upon it. Master Charles had stood in the doorway, adjusting his suspenders, ordering her death certificate written as natural causes. Eliza had held her dying child, her tears soaking the girl's hair, while her master's cold indifference carved another scar into her soul. Now, every stroke of the spoon stirred not just batter, but memories of screams, blood, and prayers left unanswered. The wooden bowl became a vessel for vengeance. Eliza's chest heaved as she reached for the vanilla, its perfume sweet and delicate, but to her the scent carried the copper temps of blood, the bitter taste of injustice. She poured it in any way, folding it into the mixture, her movements growing sharper, her breath heavier. "Justice," she whispered under her breath. The word trembled in the air, unheard by the others bustling around her. She paused, gripping the spoon, her dark eyes staring into the smooth batter. The pouch of powdered glass pressed against her hip, hot as a brand. The deadly crystals were patient, invisible, waiting to be born into the mixture, waiting for their moment to become the voice she had never been allowed. The kitchen filled with noise again. Ruth rushed past with a tray of polished crystal, her young eyes lit up as she leaned toward Eliza. "Miss Clara's gown is here." It came in a chest from London, with pearls sewn right in the bodice. "They say it cost more than this whole kitchen." Eliza forced her lips into a smile, though inside her heart bled at the thought. Another dress came to her mind, not white silk and pearls, but Anna's plain cotton shift, torn and bloodied, the last thing she had worn before being taken away. "Beautiful," Eliza muttered absently, though her voice carried an edge that Ruth didn't notice. Around her, the scent of roasting meats and simmering greens filled the air, but Eliza tasted only bitterness. She watched Henry line up crystal glasses, each one worth more than a slave would earn in a lifetime. The grotesque theater of wealth and power unfolded before her. Today, the guests would laugh, toast, and feast, while the ones who built this world remained invisible, their pain ignored. But not today. Today, she would lace their celebration with truth. The oven's heat flared, and Eliza poured the golden batter into round pans, each layer destined to rise tall and proud. She worked with steady hands, but inside, her memories raged like wildfire. The whip, the rope, the broken bodies of friends, her daughter's final breath, all of it folded into flour, sugar, and butter. When she slid the pans into the oven, she felt the ground tremble not from footsteps above, but from something deeper, as if the plantation itself knew what was coming, as if the bones buried beneath its soil stirred in anticipation. Eliza wiped her hands and stood by the ovens, her breath steady now. The pouch in her apron pulsed like a living heart. Soon the glass would mix into sweetness, invisible and sharp, ready to deliver justice in every bite. Outside, laughter and carriage wheels echoed across the yard. Inside, the kitchen's smoke curled like incense around Eliza's head. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening not to the clatter of pots or the voices of servants, but to another sound, the faint whisper of her daughter's voice. "Mama," it said, as soft as a lullaby, "make him pay." Eliza opened her eyes, calm and sharp as a blade. "Yes, child," she whispered back, "I will." By midday, Whitfield Manor swelled with noise. The plantation grounds pulsed like a living thing, brimming with energy. Horses stamped at their reins as carriages lined the drive. White-gloved hands lifted lace parasols, and polished boots clicked. Across cobblestones, guests in their finest silks and linens floated toward the grand house. Their laughter carried on the hot Georgia air. Inside, the kitchen roared like the heart of a storm. The ovens crackled, pans clanged, and sweat poured from every brow. For most servants, it was a day of endless chaos and fear of mistakes. For Eliza Carter, it was the day her entire life had been building toward. The golden cake layers cooled. On wooden racks, 3 perfect circles, flawless in their deception. To the unknowing eye, they were nothing more than delicate sponge cakes, fragrant with vanilla and butter. But Eliza's apron carried the truth. The cloth pouch, warm against her hip, held the shards of vengeance ground to dust that morning. Every glance she cast at the cakes carried weight. Every beat of her heart whispered the same refrain. Not today, not again. This time he will taste what I have lived. Miss Eliza. Ruth's voice broke through the noise. The young girl stumbled in, arms full of folded linens, her eyes wide as saucers. The bride's carriage just arrived. She's wearing her gown already, it shines like the moon. Eliza didn't lift her gaze from the cooling racks. She stirred the icing mixture slowly, letting the sugar dissolve into the cream. That's good, child, she said evenly. Ruth tilted her head, studying Eliza's face. The older woman's calmness unsettled her. There was no trace of the frantic energy buzzing in every other servant. Ruth opened her mouth to say more, but Henry's booming voice cut through the air. Back to work, girl. This ain't no time for gawking. Ruth scurried away, her small footsteps fading. Henry turned to Eliza, lowering his voice. He's in rare form today, wants every detail perfect. Says this wedding must outshine every other family in the county. His lips tightened, and if it doesn't, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Both of them knew what Charles Whitfield's punishments looked like. Eliza met Henry's eyes briefly, then returned to her mixing. The cake will be perfect, she murmured. Her voice carried a steady rhythm, a tone so calm it almost frightened him. Henry lingered for a heartbeat longer, then left, shaking his head. Eliza's hand slipped into her apron pocket. Her fingers brushed the pouch, feeling the fine powder. Inside, invisible, deadly, waiting. As she worked, the heat of the kitchen seemed to warp around her. The air grew heavy, thick enough to choke. Yet Eliza felt strangely clear, as if her senses had sharpened. Every sound rang crisped, clang of a pan, the rush of a kettle, the shuffle of feet overhead. She could hear even the laughter of guests, spilling in from the front hall, their champagne voices drifting down like poison. And beneath it all, something else. A whisper. Do it, Mama. Her breath caught. She knew that voice. She would know it anywhere. Anna. Her daughter's spirit lingered like the faintest fragrance of lilacs, a sound softer than breath, yet heavy with pleading. Do it for me. Eliza's hands trembled for only a moment before steadying again. She poured more sugar into the icing, her face expressionless. But inside, her chest ached. The kitchen door swung open again, and the bustle grew louder. Servants rushed in and out, carrying trays of silver, platters of fruit, pitchers of wine. The entire household was a hive, buzzing with duty, driven by fear. But around Eliza, it felt as if time slowed. She stared at the cakes, at the pale golden circles that would soon be stacked high. She imagined them cloaked in white icing. Delicate flowers piped along the edges, admired by every guest in the hall. She imagined Master Charles standing tall, his new bride at his side, his cruel smile lighting the room. And then she imagined the moment that smile twisted into horror. Her lips curled faintly at the thought. Eliza lifted the pouch, careful to keep it hidden from the others. The powdered glass glittered faintly when the light struck it through the thin cloth. To her, it gleamed like crushed diamonds, each grain precious, each crystal a weapon sharper than any blade. This was no poison from a bottle. This was justice carved from the master's own rage, transformed by her patient hands into a deadly sacrament. She set the pouch back into her apron, just as the door creaked again. Ruth entered once more, cheeks flushed, eyes sparkling. Miss Eliza, she whispered, leaning close. The preacher's here. They say the vows will start soon. Eliza turned, studying the girl's eager face. Such innocence, such fragile belief that the world could still offer joy. For a moment, Eliza almost pitied her. Yes, child, she said softly, her voice steady as stone. It does make a body believe in endings. Ruth blinked, confused, but Eliza turned back to her work before the girl could ask more. The ovens roared, the air shimmered, and Eliza began the final preparations. The icing was ready, smooth, white, flawless. She dipped her spoon, spreading it across the first cake layer with slow, deliberate strokes. The surface gleamed, pure and innocent, hiding the darkness it would soon carry. As she worked, the kitchen seemed to shift. The walls wavered in the heat, the air thickened, and shadows gathered at the edges of her vision. She did not look at them directly, but she felt the presence of others watching. The spirits, she knew them well. Faces from the past, voices from the quarters, people lost to the lash, to the rope, to sickness, to sorrow. They gathered now in silence, drawn to her work, their unseen eyes fixed on the woman who would do what none of them had been able to. Samuel, beaten to death for walking too slowly. Young Isaiah, hanged from the oak for daring to look the master in the eye. And honor, sweet honor, her presence closest of all. Eliza's heart pounded, but not with fear, with strength. The strength of countless voices echoing through her veins. The first cake layer gleamed with its coat of white icing. She set it aside and reached for the second. Her hands moved with a ritual-like rhythm, folding memory into sugar, layering vengeance beneath sweetness. By the time she finished the third, the 3 golden circles had become blank canvases, ready for their secret blessing. Eliza reached once more into her apron, drawing out the pouch. Her fingers loosened the cloth. The powdered glass shimmered faintly, each grain a star caught in morning light. She held it above the first layer, her hand trembling not with doubt, but with reverence. "This isn't destruction," she whispered, so low no one else could hear. "This is deliverance." A pinch of the powder fell, vanishing instantly into the pale icing. Then another, and another. The grains disappeared without trace, but Eliza felt their weight settle into the cake, into the room, into her very bones. She moved to the second layer, repeating the ritual. Each sprinkle was a prayer, each fold of icing a vow. With every motion, she felt the presence of the spirits thicken around her, their whispers rising in unison. "Justice," they murmured, "justice." By the time she reached the third layer, the crown of the cake, Eliza's hands no longer shook. The last of the powder fell like snow, sinking into sweetness, unseen but undeniable. Her work was almost complete. She looked around the kitchen. Servants rushed, ovens flared, voices shouted. But in the center of it all, Eliza stood in stillness, her heart beating in rhythm with the voices of the dead. The cake was no longer food. It was a monument. It was a weapon. It was the truth, hidden in sugar and flour, waiting for its moment. Eliza closed the pouch, now empty, and tucked it back into her apron. Her eyes lifted toward the ceiling, where laughter echoed from the hall above. Soon, she thought. Very soon. By early afternoon, the grand lawn of Whitfield Manor transformed into a stage of wealth and spectacle. White chairs lined the grass in perfect rows. Ribbons of silk fluttered from the moss-draped oaks. A string quartet tuned their instruments. Under the relentless Georgia sun, their polished boughs gleaming like silver, carriages rolled in one after another, each carrying guests eager to witness the grand union of Master Charles Whitfield and his young bride, Clara Wainwright. Laughter spilled like wine as men in black suits and women in gowns of pastel silk descended, their faces powdered and polished. They fanned themselves against the sweltering heat, sipping chilled champagne as though the suffering of the world beyond the gates did not exist. For them, it was a day of joy, a celebration of love and fortune. For Eliza Carter, standing in the shadow of the kitchen window, it was a day of reckoning. She pressed her hands against the wooden sill, watching the spectacle unfold. The master stood tall near the altar, a makeshift platform draped in white linen. His posture was proud, his jaw sharp, his cruel mouth curved in a satisfied smile. He was the picture of wealth and dominance, a man who believed himself untouchable. Eliza's jaw tightened. She saw not his fine suit, nor his polished boots, but the man who had stolen her daughter, the man who had whipped her until her back bled, the man who had crushed the spirits of everyone around him. Beside him, Clara glowed in her imported gown, her bodice stitched with pearls, her veil flowing like spun sugar. To the guests, she was radiant. To Eliza, she was nothing more than another piece in his empire. The music swelled as the minister, dressed in black robes, stepped forward. His voice rang out across the gathered crowd. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today, in the sight of God, to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The words drifted through the humid air, settling over the guests like a blessing, but to Eliza, they landed like curses. Holy matrimony, sacred vows, till death do us part. She almost laughed. Death would indeed part them. far sooner than anyone imagined. Inside the kitchen, the heat pressed heavier. The ovens roared behind her, their flames feeding on wood and smoke. On the counter, the 3 cake layers waited, coated in flawless white icing. Beneath their innocent surface, they carried her secret, her truth, invisible to every eye but hers. Eliza dipped her spatula into the final bowl of frosting. She worked slowly, smoothing delicate swirls across the cake's crown. Each stroke was steady, each flourish precise. The cake gleamed like marble, tall and pristine, ready to be admired by all. But it was not beauty she saw. It was a monument, a tombstone in sugar and flour. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned to see Henry, his shirt clinging to his chest with sweat. His voice was tight, his face flushed. "Eliza, they're near the vows now. The cake must be ready within the hour. The master is expecting perfection." Eliza gave a single nod. "It will be perfect," she said. There was something in her tone, calm, certain, unshakable, that made Henry pause. He opened his mouth, as if to ask more, but thought better of it. With a sharp breath, he hurried out again. Eliza returned to her work. The smallest layer was done now, its crown glistening like fresh snow. She stepped back, surveying her creation. 3 tiers stood tall before her, pure and beautiful. No one would suspect the storm hidden within. As she gazed at it, the air shifted. The edges of the kitchen darkened, shadows stretching long across the floor. She knew she was not alone. They were here again, the spirits. She could feel them gather, their presence as real as the heat against her skin. Old Samuel stood tall, his back no longer bent. Young Isaiah smiled, free of the rope that had once choked him. And there, closest of all, Anna. Her daughter's face shone with pride, her eyes bright as stars. Eliza's throat tightened, but she did not falter. The spirits pressed closer, their whispers rising like wind through the oaks. "We are with you," they murmured. "Make him taste our pain. Let justice be served." Eliza closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in their strength. When she opened them, her hands no longer trembled. She reached forward and placed her palm flat against the side of the cake. It was cool, smooth, deceptive. "Soon," she whispered, "very soon." Through the window, the minister's voice carried again. "Do you, Earl Charles Whitfield, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Charles declared, his voice booming with arrogance. The crowd erupted in polite applause. "And do you, Clara Wainwright, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Clara answered, her voice trembling with youth and champagne. The guests cheered, fanning themselves as the minister raised his hands. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." The applause swelled like thunder, spilling across the plantation grounds. Glasses of champagne were lifted, voices rang with joy, a celebration of love, of wealth, of triumph. But in the kitchen, Eliza smiled for the first time in years. It was not joy that curved her lips, but satisfaction. Let them cheer, she thought. Let them toast. Their laughter would soon turn to screams. The door creaked open again, and Ruth appeared, her cheeks pink from running. "Miss Eliza," they headed inside. "The master says the cake must be ready for the reception. He wants it displayed in the dining hall before the first toast." Eliza looked at the girl, her gaze steady. "It's ready," she said simply. Ruth clapped her hands in delight. "Oh, it's beautiful. The finest cake this house has ever seen." Eliza's eyes softened, just for a heartbeat. The child still believed in happy endings. "Yes," Eliza said, her voice low but firm. "It surely will be." The spirits stirred around her, their whispers swelling into a chorus. Anna's voice rose above them all, clear and strong. "Mama, the time has come." Eliza lifted the cake with careful hands, its weight pressed into her palms, heavy, not just with flour and sugar, but with decades of grief, pain, and vengeance. She straightened her back, her face calm, her heart steady. Outside, the newlyweds walked arm in arm toward the great house, their guests trailing behind like a river of silks and lace. Inside, the chandeliers blazed, the tables gleamed with polished silver, and the air reeked of perfume and pride. The stage was set, and Eliza was ready. The air inside Whitfield Manor throbbed with celebration. Chandeliers blazed from the ceiling, their crystals scattering light across silk gowns and polished boots. The dining hall gleamed mahogany tables lined with lace runners, crystal goblets, sparkling like captured stars, silver cutlery arranged in perfect rows. The guests flowed inside like a river of privilege, their laughter rising with the clink of champagne. Servants darted silently between them, carrying trays of oysters, roasted pheasant, bowls of sugared fruit. The aroma of feast filled the air, rich and indulgent, masking the sweat and toil of the hands that had prepared it. In the kitchen below, Eliza Carter stood still. Before her rested the towering cake 3 tiers high, a monument of white icing and delicate swirls. It was beautiful, flawless, the kind of masterpiece the master demanded. Yet beneath its innocence lay the secret that only she knew. The powdered glass was invisible now, folded into sweetness, waiting in silence. Her hands hovered near it, steady, reverent. She no longer saw a cake. She saw a weapon, a sermon, a reckoning disguised as desert. The door opened. Henry entered, his chest heaving, his voice urgent. "Eliza, it's time. Master wants the cake, presented at once." She nodded. No hesitation, no fear, only certainty. Henry's gaze lingered on her face. Something about her unsettled him. Calm, her composure. It was not the frantic energy of a servant rushing to please. It was something deeper, sharper. But he said nothing. He simply stepped aside. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron, though they were not sweaty. They were dry, strong, steady. She bent her knees, slid her hands beneath the silver base, and lifted. The cake rose with her, heavy but balanced, its weight pressed into her arms like a living thing, as though it carried not just sugar and flour, but the burden of every lash, every scream, every prayer unanswered. The kitchen quieted. The younger servants paused, eyes wide, watching as Eliza carried the cake toward the door. Some gasped softly, sensing something they could not name. A strange silence followed her, broken only by the crackle of the ovens. As she stepped into the hallway, shadows gathered around her. She could feel them, the spirits. They walked with her, old Samuel at her left, young Isaiah at her right, their faces solemn and proud. Behind them, dozens more men and women, old and young, those who had suffered and died under rain, and closest of all, Anna, sweet Anna, her daughter, radiant in spirit, her eyes shining with love and fire. "Mama," Anna's voice whispered, a breath against her ear. "Carry it proud, carry it high." Eliza's steps were slow, deliberate. The polished floorboards creaked beneath her weight. With each stride, she felt the air grow heavier, charged with something unseen, as if lightning coiled above, waiting to strike. The corridor opened into the dining hall. Voices filled the air, laughter, chatter, the clink of glass. The guests turned as the doors opened wide, and then, silence. Every eye fixed on Eliza and the cake she carried. Gasps of admiration rippled across the room. "Oh, how magnificent! Look at the detail, so delicate. Surely no other plantation could boast such artistry." Master Charles Whitfield stood at the head of the table, his arm draped around Clara's waist, his cruel mouth curved in a grin of pride. "Ah, there she is, my faithful Eliza, bringing us the crown of the feast." Eliza kept her eyes lowered, as custom demanded, but her lips curved in the faintest trace of a smile. He thought this was devotion. He thought this was loyalty. He had no idea what devotion truly meant. She walked forward, her every step measured, her arms steady. The spirits pressed close, their whispers rising like a hymn only she could hear. "Justice, justice, justice." At last, she reached the head of the table. With careful grace, she lowered the cake onto the polished mahogany surface. The tiers gleamed in the light, towering and perfect, a monument of sweetness. The room erupted in applause. "Magnificent," Clara exclaimed, clapping her hands. "Why, it's the most beautiful cake I've ever seen." Master Charles beamed, his chest swelling. "You've outdone yourself, Eliza," he declared. "Truly, the finest cake this house has ever seen." Eliza stepped back, folding her hands neatly in front of her apron. Her head bowed, her expression humble, her heart burning like fire. The applause faded. Guests returned to their seats, champagne glasses lifted, their eyes bright with expectation. The air filled with chatter once more, but Eliza heard only the pounding of her own heart. Steady as a drum, the minister offered a prayer over the feast. Platters of food were served. Glasses clinked, yet the cake remained untouched, standing tall at the center of the table, drawing every eye, commanding silent admiration. Eliza lingered in the corner, still as stone. She could feel the spirits gathered around the table, circling the cake like guardians of a sacred altar. Their eyes glowed with anticipation. Her daughter's voice came again, soft but firm. "The moment is close, Mama." Eliza nodded almost imperceptibly, her gaze fixed on Master Charles as he laughed, his voice booming across the hall. His bride giggled beside him, radiant in pearls and innocence. The guests leaned in, their conversations flowing like wine. None of them knew, none of them suspected that death sat among them, cloaked in sugar, smiling in icing, waiting for the first cut. The hours stretched, thick and heavy. Each moment pulsed with tension. Eliza's breath came slow and deep. She felt no fear, only clarity. Her eyes drifted to the cake. Its white surface gleamed beneath the chandeliers. Beautiful, deadly. Soon, she thought. Very soon. The spirits whispered in unison, their voices like wind through Spanish moss. Make him taste it. Make him feel it. At the head of the table, Master Charles lifted his champagne flute high. His voice boomed. "My friends, before we feast on this magnificent creation, let us toast to love, to prosperity, and to the future of Whitfield Manor." Glasses clinked, guests cheered. Clara beamed. And Eliza smiled, hidden in the shadows. The stage was set. The knife was waiting, and justice, folded into sweetness, lay in silence ready to be served. The dining hall shimmered with light and laughter. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, scattering fire across the polished mahogany. Silk gowns swirled as women fanned themselves against the heavy Georgia heat. Men's voices boomed, their laughter thick with champagne. But at the head of the table, the true spectacle stood untouched. The towering white cake, tall and magnificent, a symbol of wealth and pride. Guests leaned forward to admire it, whispering about its elegance, its perfection, and, in the corner, unseen, Eliza Carter waited. Her hands folded neatly before her apron, her back straight, her eyes lowered. She looked every bit the obedient servant, but inside, her heart beat in rhythm with the voices of the dead. "Justice, justice, justice." Master Charles Whitfield rose from his seat, his champagne flute in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, his voice booming across the hall, "a feast is not complete without its crown. And today, that crown is before you the finest wedding cake in the county, perhaps in all the South." The guests clapped, their admiration spilling like wine. Clara, his bride, blushed beneath her veil, her gloved hands clapping with delicate delight. Charles set down his glass, lifting the silver cake knife. Its blade glinted beneath the chandelier, sharp and gleaming. He turned toward Clara, offering it with a flourish. "Shall we, my dear?" Gasps of pleasure rose from the crowd. "How sweet!" someone cried. "The couple will cut the cake together." Clara giggled softly, her cheeks pink. She placed her hand over his, and together they pressed the blade against the first tear. The room hushed, all eyes fixed on the cake. Eliza's breath caught. Her fingers twitched against her apron. Around her, the spirits leaned in, their whispers curling through the air like smoke. "This is it. Let him taste it. Let justice be served." The blade sank into the soft sponge with ease, sliding through butter and sugar, through sweetness laced with death. A perfect slice fell onto the silver server. Clara lifted it delicately, placing it on a porcelain plate rimmed in gold. Applause burst across the hall. To the bride and groom, voices cheered. Charles took the fork, grinning proudly. "To us," he declared. He raised the bite toward his mouth. The spirits swelled around Eliza, their voices a chorus now. Her daughter's voice rang above them, all clear, insistent, filled with fire. "Mama, it's time." Eliza's breath slowed, her heart steadied. This was the moment she had lived for, the moment she had prayed for in the dark, wept for in silence, longed for with every scar on her body. Charles placed the fork between his lips. The room cheered, glasses clinked. Clara laughed beside him. The cake passed his tongue. Sweetness, first, butter, sugar, vanilla, perfect, flawless, exactly what he expected. But beneath its sharpness, invisible, merciless, the powdered glass scraped against his gums, cut into his tongue. It slid down his throat like fire. His smile faltered, his brows creased. At first the guests didn't notice. They were too busy laughing, clapping, raising their glasses. Clara dabbed delicately at her lips, savoring her own bite. But Eliza noticed. She saw the twitch in his jaw, the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. She saw the way he swallowed hard, his throat working against the shards tearing their way down. Her lips curved in the faintest smile. The spirits stirred, their whispers triumphant. Yes, yes, he feels it now. Charles cleared his throat, forcing another grin. Exquisite, he declared, his voice strained. The finest cake I've ever tasted. The guests erupted again in applause. Marvelous, a masterpiece. Clara lifted her fork for another bite. Eliza's stomach clenched. For a moment, doubt pierced her calm. Clara was young, innocent. She was not the one who had whipped, beaten, stolen, and destroyed. She was simply another caught in his web. But the powder was already there, the cake already tainted, the path chosen. Clara smiled sweetly, unaware, as she savored another forkful. The guests followed suit. Plates were passed, slices served. Laughter filled the hall as sugar met tongues, as sweetness melted across palates. No one suspected the hidden storm. Eliza watched from the corner, her face unreadable. Her hands remained steady, though inside her chest, her heart beat with the rhythm of drums. Each guest who lifted a fork brought her closer to the moment when whispers would turn to gasps, when laughter would twist into screams. Charles shifted in his chair, a bead of sweat glistening on his temple. His hand tightened around the fork. He coughed once, twice, a rough sound that broke through the merriment. Heads turned. "Are you well, sir?" A man called Charles waved him off, forcing another smile. "Just the champagne," he rasped. But Eliza knew better. She saw the flicker in his eyes, the strain in his throat, the way his smile fought against the grimace beneath. The shards were working. The spirits crowded closer, their whispers swelling to a chant. Justice, justice, justice. Eliza closed her eyes for a heartbeat, breathing in their voices. When she opened them, her gaze fixed on Charles. His time had begun. The room did not yet know it. The guests still laughed, still toasted, still marveled at the beauty of the cake. But beneath the surface, the cracks had formed. The reckoning was no longer a dream. It was here, and Eliza, standing silent in the shadows, felt the weight of 2 decades lift from her shoulders. This was only the beginning. The dining hall of Whitfield Manor pulsed with noise and light. Crystal goblets clinked, violins sang, and the scent of roasted pheasant mingled with jasmine perfume. Guests leaned close across the long table, whispering jokes, laughing loudly, their faces flushed with wine. At the head, Master Charles Whitfield sat tall beside his bride. To the room, he looked the image of triumph, a wealthy landowner, newly wed, smiling broadly for all to see. But Eliza Carter, watching from the corner, saw what no one else noticed. Behind his grin, a shadow flickered. His jaw tightened, his throat worked harder than it should. He reached for his wine more often, each sip covering the scrape of powdered glass sliding down his insides. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the goblet. To most, it was nothing. To Eliza, it was everything. The spirits gathered around her, pressing close. Their whispers filled her ears. He feels it now. He cannot hide forever. Justice is working. Eliza's lips curved faintly. She folded her hands before her apron, her eyes never leaving him. Clara, his bride, remained radiant, unaware. She dabbed at her lips with a laced napkin, laughing softly at the compliments of nearby guests. "The cake is divine," one woman said. "Truly heavenly." Clara beamed. Eliza's stomach twisted for a brief moment. Clara's innocence was undeniable, yet her fork had carried the same poisoned sweetness. But there was no undoing now. The cake was served. The path was chosen. Charles coughed again, a short, sharp sound that cut through the laughter. Heads turned. He waved his hand dismissively, forcing another smile. "Too much champagne," he said, his voice strained. "A man must learn to pace himself." The guests chuckled. The moment passed, but Eliza saw the truth. Sweat glistened at his temple, unnatural in the cool hall. His fingers tapped against the table, restless. His eyes flickered, betraying discomfort. The powdered glass was carving its path, unseen, unstoppable. Eliza's heart pounded with grim satisfaction. 20 years of silence, of scars, of swallowed pain all condensed into this moment. The hall roared with merriment, but beneath it, cracks formed. The master shifted in his chair, his smile faltering. He adjusted his collar, cleared his throat. His new bride touched his arm gently. "Are you well, dearest?" she whispered. "Perfectly," he forced out, though his voice was hoarse. He stabbed another bite of cake with his fork, as if to prove his strength, and shoved it into his mouth. Eliza's eyes narrowed. The arrogance of him. Even as his body rebelled, he would not show weakness. He would not admit defeat, but he would. The spirits stirred, their whispers growing louder, urgent. Not long now, hold steady, he will fall. Eliza pressed her palm flat against her apron, steadying herself. Her breath slowed. Her gaze locked on him like a hawk, watching its prey. At the far end of the hall, music swelled. A violin sang, a cello thrummed. Guests rose to dance, their laughter filling the air. The chandeliers glittered above, casting a golden haze across the room. But Eliza saw none of it. She saw only Charles. His fork paused mid-air. His hand shook faintly. He set it down too quickly, knocking it against the plate with a sharp clang. Guests glanced up. Clara leaned close again, worry clouding her young face. "Truly, are you unwell?" she asked softly. Charles forced a laugh, louder than necessary. "Nonsense. I've never felt better." He raised his goblet again, draining it in one gulp. But as he lowered it, his face twitched, his jaw clenched. A shadow crossed his eyes. Eliza's heart leaped. The shards cut deeper now. They would not be silenced. The guests returned to their merriment, distracted by music and dance. But whispers began to ripple soft, cautious, uncertain. "Did you see him cough? Perhaps the wine was too strong. He looks pale, does he not?" Eliza stood motionless, her presence invisible to all but the spirits. They crowded tighter, their whispers fierce, insistent. "Now he knows. Now he feels it. Justice walks with him." Charles shifted again, pressing a hand briefly to his stomach. His knuckles whitened. He forced another smile, but it cracked at the edges. For the first time in years, Eliza saw it, fear flickering in his eyes. Her lips parted in the faintest whisper. "Yes." The music swirled. Guests laughed. Clara glowed beside him, but beneath it all, the cracks spread. The mask slipped. The master's reign was beginning to crumble, slice by slice, swallow by swallow. And Eliza, standing silent in the shadows, felt the weight of the moment settle deep in her bones, that the reckoning had begun. The grand dining hall glittered like a jewel box. Chandeliers blazed above, casting warm light over velvet curtains and polished mahogany. The air buzzed with perfume, tobacco, and the sweet tang of champagne. Laughter rose with the music, violins and cellos spinning melodies for the dancers twirling across the floor. Yet beneath the elegance, something had shifted. A faint unease, like a thread tugging loose from silk. At the head of the table, Master Charles Whitfield sat tall, but his posture was no longer effortless. His jaw clenched between smiles. His eyes darted more than they should. A sheen of sweat dampened his brow despite the cool air drifting from the open windows. Eliza Carter watched from the corner, her figure quiet, almost invisible. To the guests, she was nothing more than a servant in an apron. To herself, she was a witness to history. To the spirits pressing close around her, she was the hand of justice. That the whispers of the dead filled her ears. "He feels it. His body betrays him. Do not look away." Her gaze never wavered. Every twitch of his fingers, every strained breath, she recorded it all, each sign a tally against decades of cruelty. Clara, his young bride, leaned close, her silk veil brushing his arm. "Dearest, you're pale," she murmured. "Perhaps you should rest." Charles forced a booming laugh, waving her concern aside. "Nonsense, I've never been stronger." His voice cracked on the last word. Some guests chuckled politely, others exchanged quick, uneasy glances. Eliza saw the truth. The glass was carving deeper now, cutting where no one could see. He shifted in his chair, one hand slipping briefly to his stomach before he caught himself. His fork clattered against the plate, loud enough to make nearby heads turn. Another glass of champagne. He barked at Henry, his tone sharp, too sharp. Henry obeyed, though his eyes flickered toward Eliza. He felt it too. Something was wrong. The hall continued in its rhythm. Dancers spun, skirts swishing, boots stomping to the beat. Servants moved, in silence, refilling glasses, carrying trays of sugared fruit. But the ripple of whispers grew louder. "Does he seem unwell? His color, have you noticed? It's surely nothing." The excitement, the heat. Charles raised his goblet, his hand trembling. Wine sloshed against the rim. He drank deeply, swallowing hard, as if to drown the sharpness clawing at his throat. Eliza's lips curved in the faintest smile. No wine could wash it away. No power could shield him now. The spirits swelled around her, their presence thick as smoke. She felt them at her shoulders, at her back, their voices rising in unison. He cannot escape. He will answer for us all. Stand strong, Eliza. Her daughter's voice cut through the chorus, soft yet fierce. Mama, don't look away. Eliza's eyes burned, but she did not blink. She had waited too long, suffered too deeply, to turn now. Charles coughed again, rougher this time, the sound scraping his throat. He pressed a hand to his chest, his smile faltering. Clara's face paled. Charles, she began, her voice trembling. I'm fine, he snapped, louder than intended. The hall quieted for a heartbeat, all eyes turning toward him. He forced a laugh, waving his hand. Too much wine, that's all. A man must learn to pace himself here. Laughter trickled uncertainly from the guests, brittle as glass, but the whispers at the table grew. His voice is strained, his hands shake. Perhaps he should see a doctor. Charles straightened, his pride unwilling to yield. More music, he barked at the quartet. Let the hall be filled with joy. The musicians obeyed, bows gliding across strings, filling the room with sound once more. Guests rose to dance, laughter carefully forced back into the air, but unease lingered like smoke after fire. Eliza stood still as stone, her breath steady. She could feel the shift the moment when denial could no longer mask truth. His body was faltering. The reckoning edged closer. Her heart beat in rhythm with the spirits. She imagined Anna's face beside her, her sweet daughter's hand brushing against her arm. He feels it now. Mama, the voice whispered. Every lash, every scream, every tear, he tastes them all. Eliza's eyes glistened, but her smile held. For the first time in decades, the balance was shifting. Charles pushed his plate away, his appetite gone. His chest rose and fell faster now. He leaned back in his chair, forcing his lips into a grin, though his eyes betrayed him. Clara touched his arm again, frightened. Please, dearest, let me fetch the doctor. No, he barked, slamming his fist against the table. Glasses rattled, silverware jumped. The hall hushed again. I am fine. But the guests were no longer convinced. Their whispers grew sharper, urgent. He looks ill. Surely he should rest. His face as pale as ash. The music faltered as the quartet exchanged nervous glances. The laughter dwindled. Even the servants paused, their eyes darting toward the head of the table. The hall's grandeur could not hide it any longer. The cracks widened. Eliza's heart surged. She felt the spirits lean closer, their whispers now like thunder in her ears. This is the beginning of his end. He cannot stop what has begun. Justice is here. Her breath caught, steady and deep. She pressed her hands against her apron, grounding herself. The moment stretched thick with tension, heavy with inevitability. Charles lifted his goblet once more, his hand shaking, wine trembling at the rim. His lips curled in a defiant grin. To love, he shouted hoarsely. To Whitfield Manor. The toast fell flat. Glasses rose half-heartedly, but eyes watched him closely, whispers spreading like wildfire. Eliza smiled faintly in the shadows. The stage was no longer his, it was hers. The reckoning was unfolding, slow and relentless, and no power, no wealth, no cruelty could halt it now. The chandeliers of Whitfield Manor still blazed, but the shine had dulled. Laughter sputtered, polite and nervous, like candles in a draught. The quartet played on, bows trembling across strings, yet even their music carried unease, thin and strained. At the head of the table, Master Charles Whitfield sat stiff, his smile stretched too wide, his skin pale beneath the glow. Sweat beaded at his temple, dripping into the collar of his fine suit. His chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath harder to mask. Beside him, Clara leaned in, her young face pinched with worry. She whispered, "Charles, please, let me fetch the doctor." His hand clamped around hers, tighter than comfort. "No," he hissed, his jaw rigid. Not in front of them. The guests shifted in their seats, their whispers thickening. "Do you see his hands? He's trembling. Something is wrong." Eliza Carter stood in the shadows, her posture steady, her gaze fixed. To the guests, she was invisible, another servant blending into the background. But within her, fire burned, steady and hot. She saw what they could not admit. The master's body was betraying him, and the spirits saw too. They crowded close, filling the room, though unseen, their whispers like a storm. He feels the blades. His pride crumbles. Justice cuts deep. Eliza's lips curved faintly. Her heart no longer trembled with fear, it beat with grim certainty. Charles lifted his goblet again, but his grip faltered. The crystal slipped, wine spilling red across the tablecloth like fresh blood. Gasps rippled through the hall. Clara snatched the goblet before it shattered, her hands shaking. "Enough," she cried softly. "You are not well." "I am fine," Charles roared, slamming his fist onto the table. Plates rattled, silver clattered. The hall fell silent, every eye locked on him. His breath came ragged, his face twisted, caught between arrogance and agony. Eliza's fingers brushed against her apron, grounding herself. She felt the spirits swell behind her, their whispers a chorus. "He cannot hide. He cannot silence this. He is ours now." Charles forced himself to stand, gripping the edge of the table for balance. His knees wavered, his body swayed. He raised his chin, glaring at the guests, his voice hoarse but loud. "You see, strong as ever. Do not doubt me." But even as he spoke, his legs buckled. He stumbled, his hand catching the back of a chair. Clara gasped, rushing to his side. "Charles!" The guests rose in alarm, their chatter swelling like bees in a shaken hive. Some called for water, others for a doctor. "Sit him down. Fan him quickly. He's pale as death." Charles shoved Clara's hand away, his pride burning even as his body faltered. "No doctor," he growled. "I forbid it." But his command carried no weight. His face was ashen, his lips trembling. He coughed hard, the sound tearing through the hall, bending him forward. For a moment, his mask slipped entirely. Pain contorted his features, raw and unhidden. Eliza's heart surged. She had waited years to see it. The man who had stood like stone, cruel and untouchable, now bent beneath the weight of his own undoing. The spirits pressed closer, their whispers fierce and triumphant. "Look at him fall. Look at his mask crack." Justice breathed through him. The hall boiled with panic. Guests clutched handkerchiefs to their mouths, whispering fears. Servants scurried for water, fanning desperately. Clara wept softly, begging him to sit, to rest. But Charles staggered upright again, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing with fury. "I will not be weak," he roared, his voice echoing against the high ceiling. And yet his body betrayed him. His knees buckled once more, forcing him back into his chair. He slumped heavily, his breath ragged, his face slick with sweat. Eliza stepped back into the shadows, her eyes never leaving him. Around her, the spirits hummed like thunder. "Mama," Anna's voice whispered, clear above the rest. "He feels it now. Every cut, every lash, every night you wept. He tastes them all." Eliza's eyes glistened, but her face held steady. She whispered back, too soft for human ears. "Yes, child. He will never forget it." The guests whispered, frantically, their joy curdling into dread. "What is wrong with him? Is it the heat, or the food?" "The food." The word slipped like a spark. Several guests froze, forks hovering mid-air. Their eyes darted to their plates, to the slices of cake half-eaten before them. A ripple of unease spread down the table. Clara pressed her hand against Charles's chest, her tears wetting his sleeve. "Please, husband, let them help you." But Charles's glare silenced even her. His pride clung stubbornly, even as his strength drained away. Eliza's breath slowed. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, heavy as stone. For 20 years she had dreamed of seeing him broken. Now, before her very eyes, it was real. The music had stopped. The laughter had died. The hall was a chamber of whispers, unease thickening like smoke. Charles slumped forward, gripping the table edge, his chest heaving. His fork slipped from his hand, clattering against the plate. The sound rang louder than music, louder than words. And in the shadows, Eliza smiled. This was no longer a feast, it was a reckoning. The grand dining hall of Whitfield Manor no longer shimmered with celebration. What had begun as a feast of laughter and champagne now trembled on the edge of panic. Chandeliers still blazed, violins still hummed, but the joy had cracked like thin glass. At the head of the table, Master Charles Whitfield sagged in his chair. His skin glistened with sweat, his lips pale, his eyes wide and unfocused. Each breath rattled, heavy and uneven. His young bride, Clara, clutched his arm, her silk gloves damp with tears. "Charles, please, let the doctor come. You are not well." "Silence," he hissed, though the word came weak and hoarse. His pride clung desperately, refusing to let his guests see weakness. But the guests already saw. They saw the trembling of his hands, the twitch of his jaw, the coughs that racked his chest. They whispered behind lace fans and gloved hands, "Something is terribly wrong. Is it his heart, or the food?" The words slipped like poison into the air. Food. Eyes darted to plates, 2 half-eaten slices of cake. A silence fell, heavy and suffocating, as forks hovered mid-air. A few guests lowered theirs altogether, pushing plates away with trembling fingers. Eliza Carter stood in the shadows, invisible to their eyes, but alive with fire within. She watched their fear ripple outward, spreading from plate to plate, mouth to mouth. The spirits pressed close, their whispers fierce. They feel it too. The sweetness hides the blade. The truth is among them now. Clara turned to the guests, her voice breaking. "Please, someone, fetch the physician." The minister rose, his robes swaying. "Quickly, run to town," he commanded. A servant darted from the room, his footsteps pounding down the hall. Charles tried to rise, his pride demanding one last show of strength. He gripped the table, forcing his body upward. But his legs faltered, his knees buckling. He crashed back into the chair, his breath ragged. A groan tore from his throat. Gasps rippled across the hall. Women clutched pearls. Men shifted uneasily in their seats. "This is not wine," someone whispered. "No, this is sickness, or worse." A guest pushed his plate away with a scrape. Another followed. Soon, porcelain clattered across the table as hands trembled, refusing another bite. Eliza's heart pounded steady. For years she had dreamed of this moment, of seeing him brought low before the very people who worshipped him. She felt the weight of it settle in her bones, both heavy and freeing. Her daughter's voice rose above the whispers of the spirits, soft but fierce. "Mama, they see him now, not a master, not untouchable, just a man, weak, broken." Eliza closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting Anna's voice steady her. When she opened them again, her gaze locked on Charles. His arrogance faltered, his mask cracked, and for the first time in decades, she saw fear in his eyes. The hall swirled with chaos. Servants rushed with pitchers of water, fanning him, begging him to drink. Clara sobbed openly, her veil stained with tears. Guests rose from their seats, muttering. In panic, some clutched their stomachs, convinced they too felt the glass tearing within them. A woman shrieked, "The cake! Something is in the cake!" The words split the room like lightning. All eyes turned to the towering confection at the center of the table, its white icing gleaming beneath the chandeliers. Perfect, innocent, deadly. Gasps filled the hall. Hands flew to mouths. Plates were shoved away, slices abandoned. Charles's face twisted in rage and agony. "Silence," he bellowed, though his voice cracked. "No one questions my house. No one questions my table." But the authority was gone. His voice no longer commanded, it begged. The minister stepped forward, his face grim. "Charles Whitfield, you must yield. This is no prideful matter, this is life and death." Charles's fist slammed weakly against the table. "I will not." His words broke into a coughing fit, harsh and violent. His body convulsed, his face contorting with pain. He bent forward, clutching his stomach. The hall erupted. Guests screamed, chairs scraped back, crystal shattered as goblets fell. The musicians froze, bows suspended mid-air. Servants rushed aimlessly, caught between duty and terror. Clara's cries cut through the din. "Help him, please, someone help him," but no help came. Eliza stood still, her face calm, her hands folded before her apron. Around her, the spirits roared their approval. "This is justice. This is for all of us. This is for you, Eliza." Her daughter's voice pressed close, warm against her ear. "Mama, you did what no one else could. You gave us peace." Eliza's throat tightened, but she did not weep. Her tears had been spent years ago. All that remained now was resolve. The hall was chaos. Some guests fled, their gowns sweeping through the doors. Others clutched one another, eyes wide with fear. Clara remained at his side, her body shaking with sobs, her hands helpless against his unraveling. Charles slumped further, his body folding in on itself, his once proud shoulders bent, his head lowered. He was no longer the towering master, no longer untouchable. He was a man undone, crumbling before them all. Eliza's gaze never wavered. For 2 decades, she had bent beneath his rule, her back scarred, her heart broken, her spirit bruised. But now, he bent before Herbie, for everyone broken not by whip or rope, but by the quiet strength of her hands. The reckoning thundered through the hall, unseen but undeniable. The feast was no longer a celebration, it was a graveyard of illusions. The dining hall of Whitfield Manor had collapsed into madness. What began as music and laughter now echoed with screams and sobs. Chairs lay toppled, goblets shattered across the floor, silk skirts tangled in the rush of frightened guests fleeing toward the door. The chandeliers still blazed, but their golden light only sharpened the fear etched on every face at the head of the table. The master of this house, the man who once believed himself invincible, was unraveling. Charles Whitfield, hunched over, his proud shoulders bent, his fine suit stained with sweat, his chest heaved, each breath a battle. His lips trembled, pale and bloodless. His eyes, once so sharp with cruelty, now flickered wide with fear. Beside him, Clara, his young bride, clung desperately to his arm. "Charles, stay with me. Please, please," her voice cracked, her silk gloves smeared with the dampness of his sickness. But Charles could not answer. His throat constricted with every swallow, the glass cutting deeper, shredding unseen paths through his body. His groans filled the silence between screams, raw and jagged. The guests stood frozen now, horror pinning them in place. No one moved to help him. No one dared lift a hand. His power had ruled them for years, but here, in this hall, his power crumbled like ash. And in the corner, Eliza Carter stood still. Her back was straight, her hands folded neatly before her apron, her face calm, her eyes steady. She looked upon him not as a servant, not as a victim, but as a witness to his undoing. The spirits crowded close, thick as smoke, their whispers a thunderous chorus. "He falls, he pays, he joins us in the dust." Eliza felt them, pressing at her shoulders, filling the air, their presence undeniable. Among them, her daughter's voice rose above all others. "Mama," Anna whispered, soft as a prayer, "it's time. Watch him fade, watch him fall." Eliza's chest tightened. For a moment, the kitchen heat, the lash of the whip, the nights of sobbing in silence, all of it crashed back into her memory. But she did not weep. She would not give him that. Charles gripped the table, his knuckles white. He forced his head up, his eyes scanning the room, wild and desperate. For the first time, he looked small. "No," he rasped, the words scraping his throat. "Not me, not here." Clara sobbed beside him. "Someone help him," she cried. But the guests stepped back, fear pulling them away. No doctor had arrived. No prayers could change what was unfolding. Eliza stepped forward from the shadows, her movement drawing every eye. She did not rush, she did not falter. Her steps were slow, deliberate, steady as the beating of her heart. The guests gasped. Servants froze. Even Clara's sobs quieted for a moment as Eliza's presence filled the hall. Charles's gaze landed on her. His lips parted, trembling. Recognition flared in his eyes. For years, he had seen her bent, broken, obedient. But now, standing tall in the golden light, she was something else. "Eliza," he croaked, his voice faint. Her face remained calm, her eyes burning steady. She said nothing. She owed him no words. The silence stretched, heavy as stone. Then, Charles convulsed, his body folding inward. A violent cough shook him, his chest heaving. Blood flecked his lips, staining his silk collar. Gasps rang across the hall. Clara screamed. Eliza did not flinch. The spirits surged around her, their voices triumphant. "Justice is here. His breath is his last. He joins the dead." Anna's voice pressed close, tender and fierce. "You've done it, Mama. You've freed us." Charles's hand slipped from the table, falling limp against his side. His head bowed. His body sagged in the chair. His final breath rattled out of him, harsh and broken. And then silence. The chandeliers still glowed. The violins sat abandoned. The guests stood frozen, their faces pale as ghosts. Clara collapsed against his chest, sobbing into silk that no longer breathed. Eliza lowered her gaze, her lips curving faintly, not in joy, not in cruelty, but in release. For the first time in 20 years, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. The chains that had bound her spirit loosened. The scars on her back still marked her, but inside, something broke free. The spirits whispered softer now, no longer thunderous, but peaceful. "We are heard. We are free." We are at rest." Anna's voice lingered, warm against Eliza's ear. "Mama, thank you." Eliza closed her eyes, breathing deep. Tears welled but did not fall. She had no tears left, only quiet strength. Around her, the hall buzzed with chaos, guests rushing to flee, servants whispering in fear, Clara's cries rising sharp as knives. But Eliza stood still, unmoved. The cake gleamed on the table, its white icing innocent as snow. Plates lay abandoned, slices half-eaten, crumbs scattered like ashes. What had been a symbol of pride now stood as a monument of truth. Eliza turned slowly, her step steady as she walked toward the kitchen door. No one stopped her, no one dared. She was no longer invisible. She was something greater. The spirits followed her, their whispers fading into silence as they found their rest. When she crossed the threshold, the air shifted. The hall behind her remained in chaos, but within her chest, peace stirred for the first time in decades. She did not look back, for the reckoning was complete, and Eliza Carter, once broken, once voiceless, walked forward not as a servant, but as the keeper of justice.